Take it away.
Okay, in the series that I've done on American history, I've tried to go back thousands of years so we could discern a pattern that happened in the human experience, where we had been, and I don't want to overstate that hunter-gatherers were somehow all nice people, because they certainly had their fights between each other and did things that were not altogether kind and human, but we really come to a point where there's a change in the human experience when we discovered agriculture, and that change produced a series of events that became a pattern, and that was where those who gathered great wealth and power and who didn't want to share their wealth and power built up armies and continued to plunder the land and to fight with each other. And those fights go on through all the different empires that we've come to learn about or read about. And there comes a point in the emperors, the empires of Africa, where they discover that there's a market for salt. This is in the 10th century, 9th, 10th century, because salt is refrigeration. It's a way to preserve food. And salt is considered the refrigerator of the 9th century, 10th century. And so in that process, it required moving the product across Africa, and we get into an industrial level, a mass-produced production level of an enterprise. Only the machinery for that enterprise are enslaved peoples. And this is happening on the continent of Africa, in which we had people of different skin tones, and the emperors who get criticized for doing these horrible things to their own people argue back, no, we're not doing this to our own people. We're doing this to the darker skinned people or the lighter skinned people. So racialization becomes introduced into the human experience, and it becomes a rationalization and a justification for inhuman behavior associated with slavery and in the industrialization of commodities such as salt. The same industrialization takes place with tobacco and cotton and oil and sugar and many other commodities. And so I wanted to highlight that the tool of racialization was something that served the interest of those of great wealth and power who happened to be involved in the slave trade and slave operations. It was a way to rationalize and justify what they were doing. It also became a mechanism for driving wedges between people. In that series of classes, I presented the 24 things that I think someone needs to know to understand American history. And one of the 24 things involved Bacon's rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon was angry. This is in 1667. It coincides with the importation of slave masters from Barbados into South Carolina, brutal, draconian slave operations. Remember what happens in Barbados was we had the Protestant supremacy, which morphed into white supremacy, which morphed into South Carolina and gave its roots to that concept there. And so with Nathaniel Bacon's rebellion, he's angry that the British are not killing Indians fast enough for him. And so what he does is, at that time, there were white slaves, white indentured people, and there were black slaves who had been purchased in the African slave trade. Remember, the white slaves started coming in the 1500s. The black slaves start coming in 1619, which of course has been made famous by the 1619 Project, which, if you haven't read it, it's certainly worth doing, or listening to a podcast about it. Very entertaining and very informative. Anyway, so we have the white slaves and we have the black slaves. And what Nathaniel Bacon does is he organizes them together to rebel against the colonists, the British colonists who are overseeing the government of the Virginia colony. And along the way, Bacon dies and the rebellion fizzles out. But the significance of Bacon's rebellion is that it highlighted the threat that was posed by organizing all of the underclass together and to fight against the powers. And so the House of Burgesses in Virginia passes laws stipulating rules for how you can handle your white slaves and different rules for how you can handle your black slaves. And so that drives a wedge, and it becomes a source for the white slave to feel superior to the black slave. And so this racialization finds a new mechanism for manifesting itself on the North American continent. And that became a very important tool for managing and controlling the American population. The wedges, the racial hatreds, the biases, the narratives that became embedded culturally into America. So I highlighted Bacon's rebellion for that specific reason. Now, when we come to the 1960s, we have Black people are protesting to gain civil rights, to be treated equally along with everyone else. Now, by the way, you can, if you happen to get any of the right-wing emails that get circulated every day, email is a key tool for them to send out these essays about why Black people are not equal to white people. They don't use those terms exactly, but they disguise it. And they'll talk about how not everybody's equal. You know, this person can play basketball better than I can. I can sell automobiles better than that Black person. See, they do it in a way of, again, highlighting the racial aspects. And so we are confronted with this vexing problem for America, the racial animus and racial divide. And it's as if there is no answer to this problem. There are answers. One time when I presented a class about it, this one person responded when I said that very angrily, saying, "You do not know how to fix the racial animus problem. Because if you did, you would have fixed it." Her presumption was that everyone thinks that racial hate is bad. And if there was an answer to bring it to an end, we would all embrace it. And the problem is that what you must understand is that there are people who benefit from racial hate. The political campaigns. And that by then, that's not to say this party is better than that other party. When the racial advantage, when the racial hate advantage was located in one party, that's what they did. They stroked fears of race. And when it then was handed off and when other party rebranded and took on the race issue, then they adopted it. So it is, understand, there are people who benefit from it. The story about the money that's being spent on political campaigns. Mind you, if there is a contest which involves a Black candidate, the opposition is funneling plenty of money into the campaign, arguing about crime. If it's a campaign that doesn't involve, two racially disparate candidates, the issue that's being promoted is the deficit, or I'm sorry, the inflation. So I mean, so understand that what we have is that racial disparities are there for a reason. There are people benefiting from it. Now, one of the problems that came along with Martin Luther King is that after trying many different things, having some advances, he's still frustrated because this vexing problem is not getting solved. And he then comes to see that it's bigger than just Black people who are being abused. He comes to see that the Vietnamese are suffering the same way. They're being brutalized by colonialism. He also comes to see there are many dirt poor white people who are the victims of greed, wealth, power, greed. And so he expands the coalition that he wants to pull together. And in 1967, he begins planning the Poor People's March on Washington, which is bringing together not only Black people, white people, and all people of color. That reverberated amongst the people who were benefiting from it all.
All right, fine. Hello there, buddy. How you doing? Fine.
I think that by 67, Martin was thinking about how you mount something that's very different from what he had done. His center of motivational gravity was moving from pure civil rights into broad social change. There had been these very powerful issues. You had northern Black rebellions. 65, there was Watts. 67, there was Detroit and Newark. Fire, looting. That had scared the hell out of white people. And a lot of Black people as well. I think that America was ready to have a nervous breakdown.
King comes to the conclusion that these resentments that were being expressed in these riots in these big cities were not something that you could cure with the stroke of a pen, that it was a result of poverty, multi-generational poverty, that you had to rewire society in a dramatic way.
Now, I want some of you all to go to Washington with us, even if you have to bring your whole family. We are going to have in Washington facilities, and we're going to have food, and we are going to demand that the government do something about these conditions. Now, we want y'all to come on to Washington when you get out of school.
With the Poor People's Campaign, Martin is talking about taking these poor people to Washington, build tents, and live on the mall until this country did something about poverty. Said, we can do better than this.
We assemble here together today with common problems
He started to look at the option of bringing all poor and suffering people together. And it's like, you know, sort of, doggone it, let's take on the whole system. Let's deal with the systemic poverty.
Thank you very much. We're rushing to get over to Alabama, and we've enjoyed being in Mississippi today. Many people will go into Washington by foot. We're going to have a mule train also coming out of the South. In 1776, the nation signed a huge promissory note. In this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
King was, in fact, talking about redistribution of wealth. He was talking about passing money down and shaking the system up. The Poor People's March on Washington was going to shake the government to its core.
Can you imagine what will happen if all these black and white and brown people will go to Washington and build tents and live in tents in Washington? You're talking about a redistribution of the wealth of this country? Oh, no. No, no, no. You're talking about new tax laws? No, no. Don't let King get to Washington.
No, no, no. Don't let King get to Washington. And it's important to understand that what's happening, what King is doing, if he is going to go and fight for poor people, fighting against those of great wealth and power. The reason they have great wealth and power is because of the poor people. You're striking right at the heart of their very existence. And people want to believe some lone nut killed Martin Luther King, not these people who are threatened by losing enormous amounts of wealth and power. No, didn't have anything to do with that. Just a lone nut.
This is where it began, the rural South. And here where it began, for the Negro, the problem remains. There's no ghetto here, just poverty. The worst kind of poverty. The kind of poverty that makes you wonder, can this be the United States of America, the richest country in the world, in the year 1967? It is not just material poverty, there is also a poverty of the spirit.
What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. But it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
And King's ability to communicate and to persuade resonated with the baby boomers who came of age in the 1960s.
the end of March in Memphis, Tennessee, garbage workers who were mostly black and grossly underpaid were out on strike.
These men who were really at the low rung on the totem pole just got tired of being treated less than men. And if you notice that sign they had, it didn't say peace, it didn't say freedom, it didn't say justice. All it said was, I am a man.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly.
Martin Luther King, the nation's preeminent civil rights leader, came to Memphis to express moral support for the men on strike.
Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right.
On March 28th, the Memphis police were out in force. About 12,000 demonstrators gathered to march down Beale Street in support of the garbage workers. King was planning to lead a poor people's march on Washington that summer, an ambitious new campaign focusing on economic justice. Memphis was supposed to be the dry run.
There was a group of young guys called the Invaders, some of whom were on the FBI's payroll. We didn't know that at the time. But they were there really to stir up trouble. These young guys had taken the sticks off of the placards, started breaking out windows, and they started the riot. And you know, once you start, everybody gets in it. And rather than try and isolate the people who were rioting, the police just waded into the crowd, just beating people indiscriminately, just beating them. It was horrible. Martin was taken up physically, put in a car, and taken to the closest hotel for his own safety. And he said, we've got to have a peaceful march. If we don't do it here, we can't go to Washington.
King was despondent. Others were losing faith in his nonviolent philosophy. Maybe his time was past. Martin Luther King was at a crossroads. Despite doubts, despite death threats, he refused to turn back. On the night of April 3rd, he appeared before a packed congregation at Mason Temple.
It was thundering and lightning, and the rain was coming hard. And Martin didn't take a text. We called it a mountaintop speech. He just started speaking extemporaneously. And I'd not heard him. Of all the times I'd heard him speak, I'd not heard him like this.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
I feel that he was going through a purging of his fear, that I no longer fear death. He always said he would not live to be 40. He didn't think he would. He wanted to, but he never thought he'd live to be 40 years old. He was 39 when he was killed.
The next day,
King is deeply pessimistic that America will ever undertake the pursuit of real equality for black people.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I'm going to read an opening statement.
And that leads him to announce the idea of holding a poor people's campaign in Washington in the spring of 1968.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference will lead waves of the nation's poor and disinherited to Washington, D.C. next spring to demand redress of their grievances by the United States government. We will go there, we will demand to be heard, and we will stay until America responds.
The FBI was deeply alarmed by these plans. For Hoover, this was his home turf. But they're also very concerned about the kind of conflict that might emerge out of this. They thought it could be a significant threat to the national capital in particular.
Power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous of saying no. Black people, Mexican Americans, American Indians, Puerto Ricans, Appalachian whites, all working together to solve the problem of poverty.
It bears emphasis that William Sullivan, the head of American domestic intelligence, in late March of 1968 begins revising and expanding the FBI's primary document to indict Dr. King, and chooses to add, for the first time, the rape participation allegation to his revision of this document.
It's unclear how much we're ever going to know about any particular incident in King's sexual history, particularly the most explosive allegation that's been made.
Handwritten annotations on this document alleged that King was present at the rape of a black female parishioner by a Baltimore minister, and that he, quote, looked on and laughed. I have many, many questions about this. It's supposed to be an audio tape, but included within this document is the assertion that King looked on, which I thought was strange. That in itself, to me, was a huge red flag.
The agents who were listening in live time in a room right next door to where this was taking place did nothing. Their focus was on gaining embarrassing material.
We're going to have to not assume that everything that's said in those documents is true. I think also not assume that everything that's said in those documents is false. And I also think that we have to understand that FBI agents were making their own very subjective judgments about what's actually happening.
One of the things I was really struck by this is how much it adheres to J. Edgar Hoover and William C. Sullivan and the FBI's representations of King. The agents were really rewarded for finding this kind of material that would undermine the civil rights movement and other black organizations. And so in some ways it provides this grand narrative that has this allegedly big revelation in the context of this larger life of misconduct.
Sullivan is updating and expanding this document because of the political threat to the Johnson administration that this poor people's campaign represents. All of a sudden, Sullivan's work on this revision halts. And it halts because Dr. King is murdered.
The night before his assassination, King gave one of the most remarkable speeches of his whole career. One of the themes was the idea that protest itself was really in peril. You were seeing crackdowns all across the country, increasing concerns about violence, and he was really making a claim that in Memphis, it wasn't just the rights of workers, it wasn't just racial justice that was on the line, but it was also the right to speech, the right to protest, the First Amendment itself.
If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Good evening. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, 39 years old and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the leader of the nonviolent civil rights movement in the United States, was assassinated in Memphis tonight. A sniper's bullet cut down Dr. King as he stood on a hotel balcony in Memphis.
The special bulletin flashed on the television that Dr. King had been shot. And I just stood there, you know, a long time. And then a little while later, they said Dr. King was dead. And I was angry. And there's a whole lot of other people were angry.
We are very upset today because we lost in our generation somebody like a father. In our lifetimes, people 25 and 26, he's the first major man we ever saw who started a bus ride and everything like that. And today, many people are out here on the street wondering which way they're going to turn because we don't know where we're going to go. Do we go to the right? Do we go to the left? We're not sure today.
I don't think the FBI had a deep interest in protecting King. In fact, there are many moments in which the FBI refused to act in a kind of bodyguard capacity or even a warning capacity when King was under threat. In the end, after Hoover felt that he was under enormous pressure, the FBI did conduct a pretty decent, wide-ranging, incredibly labor-intensive investigation to find someone who was involved in King's assassination.
The man named as James Earl Ray was arrested at 11:15 this morning by 2 Scotland Yard detectives as he passed through the British immigration offices for a flight to Brussels. An announcement by the American FBI Director, J. Edgar Hoover, said the man was fully armed with a loaded pistol and he carried 2 Canadian passports in a false name.
I think once they understood that the FBI's investigative reputation was going to be at stake in this case, they poured enormous resources into trying to bring that case home.
Ray's life and civil rights were being guarded more closely than those of Martin Luther King, whom Ray is accused of murdering.
I always am amazed at, you know, with the surveillance by the FBI 24/7 around Dr. King and the SCLC, that they wouldn't be aware of James Earl Ray at Lorraine Motel.
I don't think James Earl Ray had anything to do with Dr. King's assassination, so I can't really comment on that.
The assassination of King and the fact that we were doing surveillance that day when he was shot has always been in the back of your mind going, you know, did we not know this? Could we not prevent this? I didn't hear anything that would indicate that headquarters knew and chose not to do anything. I never saw that. I never heard that. But it was a question everybody had because it was a legitimate question. You know, why did we not intercede if we were there?
This was an emotional, frustrated, outraged nation. Other people were trying to incite to violence. We always said that the only thing that could defeat us was violence.
There be singing, there be singing.
And I think that's still true in this country. I don't think violence will not succeed in changing this nation.
And before I'll be a slave,
Whether it's white violence or black violence, or any other color violence.
and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me.
Dr. King used to laugh and joke about his death. He said, look, you're gonna die. Death is the ultimate democracy. Everybody's got to die. And you don't have anything to say about when you die, where you die. Your only choice is what is it you give your life for?
Next one set. Here. Take me a second, bear with me.
By the middle of the 19th.
Okay. Here.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now.
Nonviolent protest seemed to have run its course. The final tragic blow came on April 4th, 1968.
And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you.
Less than 2 years after the March Against Fear, the apostle of nonviolence would be felled by the very violence that he had spent his life opposing.
So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
With Dr. King's voice stilled, Black resistance would take a new form.
Funding for the
And to here, share. And so we have what I'm suggesting in my presentation of my evidence in support of my theory that James Earl Ray was not the lone killer of Martin Luther King. There were much more powerful forces behind it who orchestrated an assassination. And that what we have, what I think it's important to really start from the broader picture, this is following a pattern of, brutality at any cost to protect the institutions that are serving the wealthy and the powerful. And we have the murder of Kennedy, we have the murder of Martin Luther King, we have the murder of Bobby Kennedy. In all three of those cases, we don't have ballistics that matches for the bullets and for the weapons that are allegedly used. In all cases, the weapons are left for the investigators to easily get their hands on them and find them. In all, we have a lone nut who's coming out to do. There are people who believe in coincidences, but when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, it's just not real. And when you see them following the same patterns, it suggests that these assassinations are planned and orchestrated by the same unit. So, as we look at the murder of Martin Luther King,
didn't even know he was there.
It's a lot more than one tragedy. Okay, Lauren, we can open up and Lauren, you have to unmute. You were unmuted before you muted.
Okay. If anyone has any questions or comments or
oh no, wait, before I forgot something. I want to give my poem.
Oh yeah.
We do the discussion.
Everybody stand down.
I want to share with you lyrics from Tupac Shakur, and I'm just gonna do a short segment of his whole poem that goes on, but I'm going to send you the whole poem in my after class notes, and I'd like for you just to take note when you look at the lyrics that are in rap music and hip hop and all of that. These are very complex lyrics. They're not, your easy stuff. So in here, hopefully my throat will not give me a problem. I have to say G, and I'm going to say G stands for gangster. And so I will replace the G with gangster just so that we understand it. Okay, this is from Life Goes On. How many brothers fell victim to the streets? Rest in peace, young nigga. There's a heaven for a gangster. Be a lie if I told you that I never thought of death. My niggas, we the last ones left. But life goes on. As I bail through the empty halls, thinking in my jaws, ring, 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 quiet, y'all, incoming call. Plus this, my homie from high school, he's getting by. It's time to bury another brother. Nobody cry. Life is a baller. Alcohol and booty calls. We used to do them as adolescents. Do you recall? Raised as gangsters, locked out and blaze the weed. Get on the roof. Let's get smoked out and blaze with me. 2 a.m, and we still high-assed out, screaming, thug till I die. Before I passed out. But now that you're gone, I'm in the zone, thinking I don't want to die alone. But now you're gone, and all I got left are stinking memories. I love them niggas to death. I'm drinking Hennessy while trying to make it last. I drank a fifth of that ass when you passed. Life goes on. The poem is a very powerful one, and I feel it highlights the profound frustration of people who at every turn have the rug pulled out from under them, get stopped by laws, by bullets, by one thing or another, and then get told, well, they could do what we do. Okay, now
Pull
we can.
themselves up by their bootstraps. That was being raised by, as gangsters. That's very profound. I think you've just, everybody's quiet.
Margita.
Here we go.
If you'll unmute, Margita.
Sorry. So I'm trying to connect the dots of logic, going back to MLK's final refocusing his efforts on poverty and social justice in the United States, and therefore planning a very powerful anti-poverty movement that includes different races and even those that we sometimes associate with being members of the KKK from the mountains. Anyway, so if you believe that, I mean, not you personally, anybody who believes that, then groups that felt extremely threatened by that particular new focus on the demand of creating programs that would pull these masses out of poverty. So what that would mean is putting a lot of money into new social revision programs, support, jobs, whatever, education. How would that be financed? Well, by higher taxation of those on the upper income, or the what we now call the 1%ers. So is that what you would say is the driving force behind his assassination, is to prevent those groups from feeling it in their profits? And if that's the case, that's kind of such a, I don't want to say dumb, it's not dumb, but it's so crass and unnecessary. I'm trying to get my head around that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question. And let me say that in the evolution of my thinking, I came to think that, yeah, it's simply their greed. They don't want to pay taxes. And as I kept studying and kept contemplating this vexing issue, I came to realize it's not about that. That the money that it would take and the tax redistribution that would be involved is really insignificant. That what is really there is that if you did that, you're taking away that tool that allows them to obfuscate, to distract, to continue to use as a political tool. See, the fact that people are desperately poor, if I can get them to believe, white people that is, to believe the reason you're desperately poor is because of those black people, and you buy into it, what you become is, when I say you, I'm meaning the collective you, not you, Marnita. But what I'm saying is people then think, they become focused on, yes, the cause of my problems are those other people over there, not the system, not the whole systemic nature of it. So their focus is on that, not on the empire building, not on the greed, the immorality of the whole system. So it becomes, I don't want to solve the problem because that problem is at the root of the system that I'm benefiting from. You know, to be able to, you know, solve some of our, you know, basic inner city problems, the amount of money is not significant. I mean, it really, when you look at the overall wealth of the nation, these things are pittances, really. But giving up the political tool of racial animus, it would be is something that they consider very valuable and have from 1667 on out, and the idea of wedge politics begins before then as well. You know, Margita, you've asked many times, well, what do we do to solve the problem? And you know, I can go on in many different ways in which we can do things that would bring us to racial harmony and equality, where everyone is treated as if no one is better than the other, where if you commit a crime, you're going to go to jail just like the other person. You know, I can talk about all that stuff, but then I have to say, having worked on many things like that, what I came to realize, and this was the evolution of my thinking, was that they don't want to solve it. They're benefiting from it. And that's why we're not going to solve
it. So are you saying, Sal, that it's really the power is more important than the money?
Absolutely. It's, you know, you know, you have to put them all together. Wealth, power, greed. That they're they're inseparable. But when you already have, you know, $3 billion in your bank account, how much more do you need? So it's not really about the money. I want to be able to control Twitter. I want to cause the political explosion across the world. That's powerful. And so those things become far. Why would Saudi Arabia have to say, I'm going to cut production now, even though I made a commitment to America that I was going to increase production because of the oil shortage across? We can do it. We can do it easily. They'll even make money from it. Why would they not do it? Power.
And blaming people that, like in the George Floyd protests, blaming Antifa, when Antifa, why would they be protesting there? They weren't.
That's that whole obfuscation, you know, drive wedges, people who are going to believe that stuff are going to latch onto it. You know, we did the class on propaganda and psychology, the idea of the narrative that we all of us have a narrative in our head about how the world works, about what America means, about my life, right? We all have our tales that are there. And those things are biases. So that when something stimulates the topic, we immediately jump into that narrative, and you know, it's a way of efficiently getting up to speed on whatever the topic is. If I have embedded that narrative that you are suffering as a poor white person because they're giving all these things to those poor Black people, and you believe it, as soon as I have a Black Lives Matter demonstration, I'm going to throw something in there to stimulate that narrative as a counter to your being sympathetic.
May I
What
have a
else?
little PS here? What seems to me one possible way to end all this craziness in the way you described it is to wait out the change in demographics in this country. Because as we know, and that's why so many fragile white males are becoming very right-wing, because they believe they're being out, there will be more other ethnic groups and they will be replaced, which is actually true. So if things continue, the number of whites, of these fragile whites, will be very small. And if democracy survives, then no matter what the 1%ers want to do, there is a chance to change it through vote. What do you think of that?
My view, and again, this is just my view, and that is, this thing is systemic. It has gone on for 10,000 years. So even with the change of demographics, it gives people the notion that poor Black people, poor whites, and other people of color will gain more power. They'll alter the system so that it continues to benefit them. They will co-opt leadership, and you'll understand. The whole thing about racism isn't about skin color. It's about my ability to get you to believe that this person who looks like this is a threat to you. If we were all the same skin color, this system would come up with another mechanism to drive wedges. It would be how tall you are. It will be what's the color of your hair. It would, the size of your toe. I mean, they will. It's just another. It's what I'm saying is we think that the sense of racism is because of skin colors, but if we don't have skin colors, we'll go after what your religion is. We'll go after what your ethnicity is. The permutations are endless, and so I think we really need to contemplate the system. And mind you, when the American country was being formed, a key theorist behind it all was Montesquieu. And he was saying, you have to have a government insulated from corruption, or the whole system doesn't. What is campaign finance if not corruption? So, I mean, the very theoretical foundation of the three branches of government and serving the common good was corrupted from the very beginning. We need to think about that.
And dictators don't care about demographics.
Right.
They just do. So, Sal, what do you have coming up next week?
Okay, next week we're going to now go into the murder of King. We're going to get into the details about how it happened and all that's behind the murder. Yeah, we'll look at James Earl Ray and how he got to where he was and whether or not he had anything to do with it.
Great. Well, everyone can unmute themselves and give Sal a thank you.
Okay, everybody, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sal.
Thank
you.